It is with great pleasure that my wife and I welcome you to Windsor Castle on this, your second state visit to the United Kingdom. This relationship, which, with good reason...
The order of service had been printed 3 weeks earlier. Every pew at that cathedral service had been allocated through a process most people outside the institution never see. Herald protocol officers and senior aides spend the better part of a fortnight finalizing the precise arrangement, who sits closest to the altar, which royals are positioned where the cameras will find them first, and where the children of the heir are placed to signal their growing role within the working family. Nothing inside a service of this scale happens by accident, and nothing is decided with more care than where a child belonging to the monarchy's future generation will be seated. Prince George's place had already been settled. His name was listed in the order of precedence handed to ushers that morning. His seat, second pew, aisle side, had been confirmed by 3 separate sign-offs. Then, according to accounts that later circulated among royal watchers, a senior member of the family was guided to that same seat by an usher working from an earlier, uncorrected version of the seating chart. What followed was not loud. There was no visible commotion before the congregation settled. No raised voices, no public scene that would have embarrassed anyone watching from the nave. What happened was quieter than that, and by most accounts, far more telling. The Princess of Wales is said to have noticed first. The Prince of Wales followed, and the quiet correction that unfolded in the few minutes before the service began would, according to those who study these things closely, be remembered long after the hymns had ended. But to understand why a seating mix-up at a cathedral service could carry this kind of weight, you have to understand what an occasion like this actually represents, who George is becoming within the family's future, and why his seat was never simply a seat. What a state-level cathedral service actually means. In plain terms, a national service of this kind sits near the top of the monarchy's ceremonial calendar, just beneath a coronation or a state funeral in its formality. It is held at a cathedral, such as St. Paul's or Westminster Abbey, reserved for moments the nation is meant to mark together: a jubilee, a service of thanksgiving, a commemoration tied to the wider Commonwealth. It draws together senior royals, the Prime Minister, members of Parliament, faith leaders, and a guest list curated with extraordinary precision. The seating plan for an event like this is never a courtesy extended to guests. It is a statement, broadcast in silence to everyone present and to the cameras recording for later analysis. It signals hierarchy. It signals who within the family is being positioned as central to the institution's next chapter. The planning behind a single national service of this scale takes months, not weeks. The Earl Marshal's office, working alongside the cathedral chapter and the household's own protocol team, coordinates everything down to which pew bears which family's coat of arms on the printed order of service. Hundreds of guests will be seated according to a chart revised dozens of times before anyone is allowed to print the final version. This is not bureaucratic excess for its own sake. This is a room, or in this case, a naive, where the public image of the monarchy and its place in national life is constructed in real time, in front of cameras that will broadcast the arrangement to millions. Every placement carries weight. The order of service, much like the gold place cards at a state banquet, is not finalized the night before. It moves through layers of review and is only locked once the most senior aides in the household have signed off. When a child's name appears at a specific pew in that document, it reflects a decision made by people whose entire job is managing what these placements communicate. To disturb that placement, even by accident, even with no intention behind it, disrupts something that was built with far more deliberation than the disruption itself. George's emerging role. George's presence at an occasion like this carries meaning that extends well past his age. As the eldest child of the Prince of Wales, he is second in line to the throne, and his attendance at a national service signals that he is being formally folded into the visible structure of royal duty, a process that began gradually with smaller appearances and has been increasing in scale and formality each year. That progression matters because royal visibility, more than almost anything else in this institution, is built through repetition. A child who attends, who is seen, who occupies the right places across a span of years, becomes a child whose public identity is being shaped with intention, appearance by appearance. Within the monarchy, no one simply grows into a role. The role is constructed around the person through a sequence of carefully timed public moments, each one adding a further layer to an identity history will eventually record in full. This particular service was one of those layers, and by several accounts, one of the more significant ones to date. A national cathedral service carries a different weight than a school sports day appearance or a regional walkabout. It places a young royal inside the machinery of state ceremony, inside a room filled with political leaders and foreign dignitaries who will remember exactly where everyone sat. His seat was not a minor logistical detail, it was a milestone, one piece of a much longer architecture being built around him with patience and long-term planning. There is also the question of what George represents to the wider public. From his earliest appearances, he has drawn a level of public interest in Britain that reflects something real about how the country imagines its monarchy's next generation. Those close to the family have described a composure in him on formal occasions that surprises people who expect children to fidget, to wander, to lose focus during long ceremonies. That composure has become, whether intentionally cultivated or not, part of his developing public identity, often cited as evidence of the careful preparation behind the scenes. The cathedral seat was an extension of that broader project, the institution communicating, in the wordless language of placement and protocol, that this child belongs here, in this room, at this level of national life. So when the seat intended for George was occupied by someone else, even briefly, even by what sources close to the event have characterized as an honest administrative mix-up, rather than any deliberate slight, the staff nearby, who noticed, understood immediately that this required careful, swift handling. Ushers cannot simply ask a senior royal to move. That is not how these things work inside the household. The correction would need to come from someone within the family itself. Catherine notices first. By accounts that later made their way to royal commentators, the Princess of Wales was already seated nearby when she noticed the discrepancy between the printed order of service in her hand and the pew arrangement in front of her. She did not react visibly. Those who have observed her at formal events over the years describe a particular skill she has developed, the ability to register a problem without allowing her expression to shift in any way a camera or a watching guest might catch. She is said to have quietly signaled to a nearby aide, who in turn approached the household's protocol lead, standing near the transept. The conversation, according to those familiar with how these moments typically unfold, lasted under a minute. What was said is not something that has been confirmed publicly and should be treated as exactly that, an account that circulates among people who study these events closely, rather than a verified transcript of private conversation. But the tone, by every description that has surfaced, was measured rather than urgent, the kind of quiet, practiced correction that comes from people who have spent years managing exactly this category of problem without ever letting it become visible to the wider room. William steps in. The Prince of Wales is said to have been a short distance away in conversation with a cathedral official when the situation reached him. He had not witnessed the original placement himself. He is reported to have been informed directly by the aide his wife had spoken with, the same household coordinator responsible for confirming the final seating check before doors opened to the wider congregation. William's response, according to those present, was immediate and unhurried at once, a combination that those who know him describe as characteristic. He did not wait to see whether the situation would resolve on its own. The Prince of Wales has, by multiple accounts from people who have observed the family over recent years, become increasingly deliberate about how his children's public roles are introduced and protected, a pattern that goes beyond ordinary parental instinct into something closer to long-term institutional planning. He and Catherine are widely understood to have made careful, considered choices about the pace at which George, Charlotte, and Louis step into formal royal life. Each appearance is said to be the product of discussion, not impulse. The cathedral seat was not a casual addition to George's calendar. It was a deliberate step in a much longer plan, and when that step came under threat, even from an honest mix-up rather than any intentional act, William is reported to have moved toward the pew himself rather than allowing the matter to be handled by staff alone. He arrived, by the accounts available, with the same controlled composure his father has long been associated with in moments of private tension. But according to those who have watched him closely over the years, there was something more deliberate beneath it. People who have observed William in similar situations describe a particular kind of stillness in him, not anger, nothing close to a raised voice, but a quiet, unmistakable clarity about what needed to happen next. He did not need volume. The weight of who he is, the heir, the father, the person most directly responsible for protecting how his children are seen by the public, is described as having carried the moment before a single word was spoken. He is said to have spoken briefly and calmly to the relative in question, clarifying the seating without ceremony, and the matter was resolved within what witnesses describe as well under a minute. It should be stressed that no account suggests any defiance, embarrassment, or conflict on the part of the family member involved. By every report that has circulated, the response was graceful. The seat was vacated without hesitation once the mix-up was identified, and the entire exchange passed almost unnoticed by anyone seated more than a few rows away. Why this mattered enough to notice at all? You might reasonably wonder why a misallocated pew at a single service deserves this much attention. The answer lies in what royal seating actually communicates to people who study these events professionally. Every placement at an occasion of this scale is analysed afterward by royal historians, journalists, and foreign delegations, comparing notes on what the arrangement signals about the family's internal priorities. When a child of the heir is positioned at a particular point in a national ceremony, it says something about where the institution is heading. When someone else occupies that position instead, even for a matter of minutes, and even for entirely innocent reasons, it creates a different image, one that once captured by a long lens from the press pen outside, becomes part of the historical record, whether anyone intended it to or not. Consider what the photograph would have shown had the seating not been corrected before doors opened to photographers. A senior royal seated in the position set aside for the future king's eldest son. A visual record, permanent and shareable, of the family's youngest working generation being quietly displaced from the spot the institution itself had designed for him. Royal commentators would have noticed within the hour. The image would likely have outlived the service itself in the public memory, becoming the kind of detail referenced in every subsequent conversation about how the family balances its older and younger generations. The seat was never just a seat. It was a small but carefully authored statement about George's developing place within the institution's future, and an accidental disruption of it, however unintentional, briefly threatened to rewrite that statement without anyone's consent. Inside the choreography, nobody sees. What most people watching a national service on television never grasp is how much rehearsal exists behind even a few seconds of footage. Royal children are not simply dressed and walked into a cathedral on the morning of an event. The preparation begins days, sometimes weeks, in advance, with quiet walkthroughs at home, with explanations pitched at exactly the right level for a child's age, about where to stand, how long a hymn might last, what it means to sit still while cameras are present without anyone needing to say the word camera out loud. Those close to the household have described this preparation as deliberately unhurried, designed to make formality feel familiar rather than frightening. The aim, by every account, is for a child like George to experience an occasion of this scale, not as a test to be endured, but as something closer to routine, another version of an experience he has quietly rehearsed before. That is part of why the composure, so often remarked upon in royal children at formal events, is rarely accidental. It reflects weeks of careful, low-key preparation by parents and household staff working in close coordination, the kind of behind-the-scenes labor that never appears in a single photograph but shapes every photograph that does get taken. This preparation also explains why a small administrative mix-up, like a seat briefly occupied by the wrong person, matters more than it might first appear. It is not simply about where someone sits for an hour. It is about protecting the careful, deliberate experience that has been built around a child specifically, so that the formality of the day does not register as disruption. A child who arrives expecting their seat to be exactly where it was described to them and finds it occupied or in question, however briefly, is a child whose carefully rehearsed sense of the day has been put at risk before the day has even properly begun. That is precisely why William and Catherine, by every account available, treat these small corrections with a level of seriousness that might look disproportionate from the outside. From the inside, it is simply an extension of the same patient work that goes into every other part of preparing a child for a life inside this institution. How a moment like this travels once it leaves the room. It is worth pausing on how a detail this small, an order of service mix-up resolved in under a minute, ever becomes something discussed at all outside the people who were physically present. The answer says less about the incident itself and more about how the public has learned to read royal events over the past 2 decades. A national cathedral service is photographed from dozens of angles simultaneously by accredited press inside the building and by long-lens photographers positioned outside for the procession. Every frame is later studied, frame by frame in some cases, by commentators whose entire professional focus is identifying exactly these kinds of details: who stood where, who was seated beside whom, whether anyone's expression shifted at a moment that otherwise passed without comment from official channels. In an earlier era, a seating mix-up corrected quietly before doors opened to photographers would likely never have surfaced publicly at all. Today, even an account second-hand, sourced from someone who happened to be standing close enough to notice, and later mentioned it to a journalist covering the event, can become the seed of a wider conversation. None of this requires confirmation from the palace to begin circulating. It only requires enough plausibility and enough public appetite for detail about a family whose every visible movement has become subject to this kind of scrutiny. This is, in its own way, one of the more difficult realities the modern monarchy has had to adjust to. Previous generations of this family operated inside a press culture far more willing to look away from minor internal friction, an unwritten understanding between palace and press that certain details simply were not reported, regardless of how many people in a given room happened to witness them. That understanding has eroded steadily over the past 30 years, accelerated first by changing tabloid norms in the 1990s, and then, far more dramatically, by the speed and reach of digital and social media in the years since. A detail that once might have stayed contained within a small circle of household staff and invited guests can now reach a global audience within hours, reshaped along the way by speculation, by commentary, by accounts that range from carefully sourced to entirely unverified. This is precisely why responsible coverage of moments like this one matters, and why any retelling, including this one, should be understood as a blend of publicly available context and circulating unconfirmed accounts rather than a verified record of private exchange. The protocol facts, what a national service is, how seating is decided, why a child's placement at one carries institutional meaning, are well documented and can be stated plainly. The specific details of who said what to whom in the moments before the service began belong to a different category, the realm of accounts that have circulated among people present or close to those present, offered here as the narrative is often told, rather than as confirmed fact. What this means for how the public understands the Wales family's choices, viewed within this wider context, the swift, quiet correction attributed to William and Catherine in this story takes on a slightly different significance. It is not simply a reaction to one mix-up on one morning. It reflects an approach this couple has, by most public accounts, applied consistently since their children began appearing at formal events at all. Treat every visible detail as though it will eventually be studied, because in the current media environment, it likely will be. That awareness shapes decisions most observers would never think to question: how long a child stays at an event before being taken home, which engagements they attend and which they do not, how much advance notice is given to staff coordinating logistics around them. None of this is unique to this particular family or this particular generation. Every senior royal operating in the modern media landscape has had to develop some version of this instinct. What distinguishes William and Catherine's approach, according to commentators who have followed the family closely, is the degree of consistency they have brought to it, a deliberate, almost methodical attentiveness to detail that extends even to moments as small as a misallocated cathedral pew. The broader pattern across royal generations. It is worth noting too that this kind of careful attention to placement and precedence is not new to this generation of royals. Earlier generations of the family navigated their own versions of these tensions, often with far less public visibility into how those tensions were resolved. Royal historians have documented, for instance, long-running questions of precedence between different branches of the family during state occasions decades ago. Disputes over processional order that were settled quietly through correspondence between private secretaries rather than through any public acknowledgement that a dispute had existed at all. What has changed is not the underlying instinct toward careful, deliberate management of these details. What has changed is the audience now watching for them, an audience equipped through smartphones, through social media, through an entire ecosystem of commentary channels like this one, to notice details that would once have passed entirely unremarked. That shift cuts in more than one direction. It means moments like this cathedral seating mix-up reach a far wider audience than they ever would have a generation ago. It also means the family's responses to these moments, the speed, the discretion, the evident care taken to resolve them without fuss, are similarly visible, and by most accounts generally received well by a public that has shown, across years of coverage, real appreciation for a working royal family seen to be handling pressure with composure rather than confrontation. In that sense, a small mishandled seating arrangement, corrected within a minute by people who clearly understood exactly what was at stake, may ultimately reflect more favorably on everyone involved than a perfectly executed mourning ever could have. It offers, in miniature, a glimpse of an institution under genuine, constant scrutiny, managing even its smallest imperfections with the same quiet discipline it brings to its largest ceremonies. The long shadow of royal seating history. The British royal family's relationship with seating arrangements has never been simple, and this episode sits inside a much longer pattern rather than standing apart from it. Royal historians have long noted that questions of precedence, who walks where in a procession, who is seated nearest the monarch, whose name appears above whose on an official document, have shaped tension within this family for generations, long before the current working royals were born. These are not new anxieties invented by a younger generation, more attuned to optics. They are inherited ones, passed down through decades of an institution that communicates almost everything important through symbol and placement rather than direct statement. What makes the current chapter distinct is the visibility. Where past generations could rely on a press largely willing to look away from internal friction, today's royal family operates inside a media environment where a single photograph, a single seating chart leaked, or glimpsed by an attentive guest can circulate globally within hours. That visibility raises the stakes on every decision, however minor it might once have seemed. A seating mix-up that in an earlier decade might have been quietly resolved and forgotten by the following morning now exists within a public conversation almost immediately, reinterpreted, analyzed, and folded into a much larger narrative about generational change inside the monarchy. This is not a story about hostility within the family. There is no credible account suggesting hard feelings between William, Catherine, and the relative whose seat was briefly mistaken. It is, instead, a story about what the accumulation of these small, carefully managed moments tells the people inside the institution responsible for protecting its long-term stability. That nothing involving the next generation's visible role is treated as incidental, however small the moment might appear from the outside. There is also a quieter dimension worth examining here. The household's internal culture is one where unspoken signals carry as much information as direct instruction. Senior royals do not typically announce their intentions before acting on them. They move, and the movement itself becomes the message. Aides and household staff are trained to read those movements with a precision that comes from years spent inside an institution where almost nothing is left to chance. When the relative in question sat briefly in George's pew, everyone nearby who noticed, and several accounts suggest more than a few did, performed the same quick, silent calculation. Was this simply an honest mix-up, easily corrected, or did it require a more deliberate response? The swift, calm correction delivered by Catherine and William settled that question almost instantly. There is no suggestion in any account that this was treated internally as anything beyond a logistical hiccup resolved with appropriate speed. But the speed itself, several commentators have noted, reflects something real about how seriously the Wales family now treats the visible architecture being built around their children. How the family is said to have handled what followed. By the accounts that have circulated since, the matter was treated afterward with the kind of quiet discretion this family has become known for when something happens just outside the frame of public attention. There is no suggestion of any confrontation, no report of strained conversation between generations, no account of anyone treating the moment as anything other than precisely what it appears to have been. An honest administrative error caught and corrected within the space of a minute by people whose job in that moment was to make sure the day proceeded exactly as planned. The relative involved is widely described, including by people who do not always write favorably about the family, as having handled the moment with grace, rising without hesitation once the mix-up was identified and taking the matter in stride for the remainder of the service. That composure under a small, unplanned disruption is consistent with how this individual has generally been described across years of public life, someone who has built a body of charitable and public work over a long royal career and who has, by most credible accounts, never sought to make small moments like this one larger than they are. There is nothing in the public record to suggest villainy, carelessness, or any deliberate slight here, only an honest mix-up of the kind that can happen even inside an institution built around precision, corrected quickly and without lasting friction by people who coffer their occasional differences, share an evident investment in the ceremony proceeding smoothly. George arrives, Prince George himself, by every account, was entirely unaware that his seat had briefly held someone else. He was still being prepared elsewhere in the cathedral precinct when the correction took place, walked through the same quiet choreography that royal children are gradually taught from an early age: where to stand, how long to wait, when to walk. He arrived to find his seat exactly where it had always been listed, empty and waiting, and sat down with the composed calm that has been remarked upon at previous formal appearances. He did not know, and by design was never meant to know, that anything had briefly been out of place. That, in a quiet way, was the entire point of how the moment was handled. The adults responsible for the day made certain that nothing capable of disrupting his experience of it ever reached him. That is what protection looks like when it functions exactly as intended, invisible, complete, and delivered without ever requiring the person being protected to register that protection was necessary in the first place. When George takes his seat at future national occasions, and there will be a great many of them across the decades ahead, he is likely to do so without any memory of this particular morning ever crossing his mind. He will sit with the quiet confidence of someone whose place has, in his own experience, always simply been there waiting for him, because the adults responsible for him understood that confidence is built not only through what a child is taught, but through what they are gently shielded from having to navigate themselves. What the morning revealed. The real question worth asking after a moment like this is not about the mix-up itself, but about what it reveals more broadly. Every family carries small administrative errors of this kind, the kind of thing that, inside almost any other household, would be forgotten within the hour. What made this one worth noticing is what it suggests about a much longer pattern, the steady, deliberate way William and Catherine have approached every visible step of their children's public lives. The boundaries they have drawn around George's, Charlotte's, and Louis's developing public identities are not abstract preferences voiced in private. They are operational, acted upon in real time, even over something as small as a misallocated pew, even when there is no suggestion of any intent behind the original error. That instinct to correct quickly and quietly, rather than to let a small thing simply pass, reflects something about this particular moment in the monarchy's history. The Wales family is gradually becoming the institution's primary public face, a transition years in the making and likely to continue for decades. And every visible step their children take along the way, every seat they occupy at a national service, every appearance that will eventually become a patronage, is part of an architecture being constructed with patience and considerable care. Protecting those steps even the small, easily overlooked ones, is not treated as a minor matter inside this family. It is, by every indication available, treated as central to the work William and Catherine have committed themselves to. A commitment that several who have observed the family closely describe as resembling vocation more than obligation. The wider family's position, considered fairly, after a morning like this, it is worth pausing on how the relative whose seat was briefly mistaken is likely to have experienced it. Whatever warmth and genuine affection exists across this complicated, multi-generational family, those who have spent years inside or close to the institution tend to understand its architecture instinctively, the unwritten sense of when a quiet correction from the next generation is simply how the institution functions and not anything personal. There is no account suggesting this individual treated the moment as anything beyond exactly what it was, a small mix-up, swiftly handled, quickly forgotten. That kind of composure, choosing not to make a minor administrative error into something larger, is itself a form of quiet contribution to how smoothly these enormous, heavily choreographed events continue to run. This is not a story with a villain. It is a story about an institution where even the smallest details are treated with outsized care, precisely because so much of what the public understands about the monarchy's future is communicated not through statements, but through where people are seated when the cameras are rolling, what this single morning says about the decades ahead. Step back far enough from this one cathedral service, and what remains is less a story about a misplaced pew and more a small window into how an institution plans for its own continuation. The monarchy, whatever else can be said about it, is built around the assumption that it will still exist in some recognizable form 50, 80, 100 years from now, and that assumption requires a level of long-term planning that most modern organizations simply do not need to consider. Every appearance George makes now, every seat assigned to him at an event of national significance, is part of a slow, deliberate accumulation, building toward a future in which he will, in time, occupy a role at the very center of British public life. The adults responsible for him understand this, even when he, at his current age, cannot yet fully grasp it himself. That is precisely why a seating error lasting under a minute, involving no ill intent from anyone present, still drew the kind of swift, coordinated response it did. It was never really about the minute itself. It was about protecting the integrity of a process that has been unfolding, appearance by appearance, since before George was old enough to understand what any of it meant. There is something almost paradoxical about an institution built on centuries of tradition needing to respond in real time to media dynamics that did not exist even 20 years ago. Yet that is precisely the balance William and Catherine appear to be navigating, honoring an inherited structure of ceremony and precedence while adapting in their handling of small moments like this one to a public far more attentive, far more equipped to notice than any generation of royal family has faced before. Whether that balance holds across the coming decades, as George, Charlotte, and Louis grow into adulthood and eventually into roles of far greater public weight, remains one of the more interesting open questions about the monarchy's future. What this particular morning suggests, at least, is a family approaching that future with a degree of attentiveness that leaves remarkably little to chance, treating even the smallest details, a name on an order of service, a seat in the second pew, as worth defending quickly and quietly, precisely because nothing involving the next generation is ever treated inside this institution as entirely small. Why moments like this endure in public memory? There is a reason stories built around small, almost mundane details, a seat, a place card, an order of service, tend to stay with audiences longer than coverage of grand ceremonial set pieces ever does. The pageantry of a national service is in a sense designed to be impressive but interchangeable, one gleaming procession resembling the next across the decades. What audiences remember instead are the human-scale moments, tucked just beneath the surface of all that formality, the brief flicker of an expression, the quiet exchange near a pew, the sense that behind even the most rehearsed public occasion, there are real people making real, fast decisions about how to protect what matters most to them. That is, in the end, why a story like this one resonates. it is not really about a misallocated seat. It is about watching, even from a careful distance, built out of speculation and circulating accounts rather than confirmed fact, that a family quietly working to look after its youngest members inside an institution that gives them remarkably little room for error. The service concludes. The cathedral service continued as planned. The hymns were sung. The address was delivered. The visiting dignitaries were received, with the precision Britain's royal household has spent centuries refining. The doors opened, the family processed out together, and the photographs taken on the steps were published around the world within hours, showing exactly what was intended. A family arranged in careful, deliberate order, the senior generation at the centre, the Wales family nearby, the children of the monarchy's future seated, present and beginning, in their composed and unhurried way, to occupy the public space that has quietly been waiting for them. George's name had been on the order of service. He had sat in the seat that belonged to him for the length of the ceremony. The correction, brief and quiet as it was, had held. What those photographs could never show was the minute before, the quick exchange near the transept, the calm, unhurried walk William made across the stone floor, the relative rising, without hesitation, once the situation became clear. Only the people standing close enough to notice carried that moment away with them, the understanding that the monarchy's next generation is being positioned with a degree of intention and quiet protectiveness that leaves very little room for accidents of placement to linger, that when an order of service lists a name beside a particular seat, it is treated by the people who matter most inside that institution as something closer to a settled fact than a suggestion open to casual revision. The people who attended that morning will remember it in different ways depending on where they were standing. Most will remember the choir, the address, the particular grandeur of a cathedral filled to capacity for an occasion the nation gathered to mark together. But the handful who happened to be close enough to see a household aide lean toward Catherine, who watched William cross the nave without any visible urgency, who noticed a seat quietly change hands in the space of a single unhurried minute, will remember something else, that on an ordinary administrative mix-up, on a morning like any other, the family chose to act immediately and gently rather than let even a small thing simply pass. That is not, in the end, a small detail. It is a glimpse of how carefully this family now treats every visible step its youngest generation takes, defended without fuss, in one of the most ceremonially significant rooms in the country before the first hymn had even begun. The seat was returned to its rightful occupant. George sat in it, and the service, like all great royal occasions, proceeded as though nothing at all had happened. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you a closer look at a side of royal life you don't often hear about, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next royal update.